In this video for section 3.2, we're going to talk about some measures of variation. Variation tells us how much spread there is between data values. If the data values are all very close together, then the data values are not very spread apart and variation is small. If the data values are far apart, then the variation is large. And the easiest way that we have to measure variation is the range, or simplest to calculate anyway. The range is calculated by taking the maximum value and subtracting the minimum value, or the largest value in the set minus the smallest value. The advantage is that this is pretty easy to calculate. The disadvantage is that it's only taking into account two values in the data set, the highest and lowest value. So it's very sensitive to extremely high or low values because all it really is the highest and lowest values of the data set. It does not tell us anything about what the data looks like in the middle. So one thing that we have that we can use to give us a more accurate picture about what the rest of the data looks like is the interquartile range. It's not as sensitive to extremely high or low values. And the interquartile range is calculated by taking the third quartile minus the first quartile, or Q3 minus Q1. So if we look at this data table, it's showing us the number of text messages sent over a 1-week period by 100 Verizon customers, and we want to compute the range and the interquartile range. So I have this data set posted on Blackboard. You can download the worksheet and open it up in Minitab. I'm going to show you how to calculate the range and interquartile range in Minitab. Now you could pretty easily calculate the range because the data is in order from smallest to largest. The interquartile range is a little bit trickier to calculate by hand. So I'm going to calculate it by, as usual, selecting the column that the data is in, clicking on statistics, and checking the boxes that I want. So I want the interquartile range and the range, and I'm going to uncheck everything else. So it's giving me the values here of 446 for the range and 43.25 for the interquartile range. Now, one thing that you should be aware of is that if you look in the textbook, you'll see a different value for interquartile range for this problem. It's going to say that the interquartile range is 43.5. Now, the reason that this happens is because there are some different ways of calculating the quartiles and therefore some different ways of getting interquartile range. The textbook shows you how to do it by hand, but computer programs like Minitab and Excel are going to have slightly different formulas for finding the interquartile range. Don't worry about this too much because anytime you're asked to calculate the interquartile range in homework problems, it's always going to accept the answer that Minitab gives you. So that's how you can calculate the interquartile range and the range.